You all to the another HPO weekly tech talk session. I'm Tharindu Subashith. So today we are going to discuss on Azure Arc. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what's this Azure Arc? So Azure Arc is a solution by Azure Microsoft to enable Azure management capabilities to hybrid environment. So what is mean by hybrid environments? So when it comes to the cloud applications, so you can obviously use different cloud platforms for your solutions. Like part of your solution. So normally we used to have same say we used to use the same cloud platform for the entire solution, but in very rare times, and you might end up with having some of the resources in different cloud provider than one of them. So that's a multi-cloud scenario of the hybrid environment. And when it comes to the Azure, there's also Azure Edge capabilities where you have some source of resources in your customer's side uh, to run some of the Azure services. And also, obviously, you might end up with having some of your resources on your own premises, like on-premises data center. So any, let's say if you are enthusiastic with some technical things like Raspberry Pi, so you can end up with having Kubernetes clusters, which works on Raspberry Pis on your own premises. So what Azure Arc does is Azure Arc provides you the management capabilities in a single pane for across all these environments. So not only the management capabilities, so there are some other capabilities like DevOps practices. So I will come to that. So because those are belongs to some part of the Azure Arc services. Okay, let's move on to the Azure management area. So I said that with the Azure Arc, you are going to get the feature of centralized Azure management system for your resource, which rest on any cloud provider or on-premises or any other or Azure Edge. So what does mean is, so usually when you use Azure, so probably I think most of us have used this Azure portal in our development and managing resources, and also the Azure CLI time to time. I even can remember Pim's team did something, and also when I was at Agile like UI, we did something using Azure CLI scripts, basically doing for the resource management. And not only that, within the Azure itself, you can manage Azure policies for on the resources like the access control and all those features. So let's say your company which has a IT department or DevOps department which dedicated for managing of the resources of your applications. So with the time you have experienced your IT people team has experience on the Azure, but suddenly you got a requirement to onboard some solutions which has a part of the solution on different cloud providers or on premises. So now obviously what they have to do is they have to manage the Azure resources inside the Azure using Azure portal, Azure CLI, and enforcing Azure policies. But when it comes to the other resources which rest in the on-premises or the other cloud providers, they have to use their own the native tools belongs to those environments in order to do the management of the resources. But with the Azure Arc, you can basically avoid using those local native tools and simply use the Azure portal and the Azure CLI and even enforce some of the Azure policies with obviously with some restrictions, basically using this Azure Arc. So That's the main thing which Azure Arc does to the hybrid cloud solutions and cloud solutions. Okay, so which I explained. So the centrally managed resources like Windows, Linux servers, SQL servers, Kubernetes clusters, and even some of the Azure application services. So those are supported by Azure Arc. And so it basically centralized the visibility of the resources in the Azure portal. So that means whenever you onboard one of the resources available in the on-premises or any other cloud providers to the Azure Arc, so those resources will be visible as one of the resources inside the Azure with a Azure Resource ID and under a resource group in your subscription. So that's the easy way to see that there's a resource like this in your system. So rather than forgetting when you are having it in somewhere else than the Azure. And obviously, you can enforce some Azure policies with to meet the governance and compliance for the applications and even the infrastructure. But obviously, there are some limitations based on the uh, 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 place actual resource is located. So if it is actually located in the Azure, yes, you can obviously almost apply all the policies for the Azure resources, but there will be some limitations when it comes to the resources outside the Azure. But still, you can have some good policies enforced to make your life easier and secure the application. And the other thing is, yes, so obviously you can bring DevOps practice to the your all the resources in a single source of truth to using this Azure Arc. So basically, this will belongs to the Azure Arc enable Kubernetes service. So I will come to that area during the presentation. Okay, let's move on. So yes, so this gives you the overall picture of the Azure Arc. So we are so in the middle you have the Azure, so which you already use the Azure Resource Managers and the resources inside the Azure to just to apply some policies, security and compliances and role-based access policies, and you can see all your resources single pane of glass. So you can all see all your resources under subscriptions and the resource groups and some other practices. And with the tools available in the Azure, like the portal and the Azure PowerShell and the Azure CLI, all those things. And so when it comes to the native environment, the on-premise multi-cloud and edge scenario, so you obviously have your own local management tools, but with the Azure Arc, obviously you can take some of the work overloads to the Azure. Still, there are some parts which we can't take into the purely onto the Azure. So, but most of the things can be offloaded to Azure using these Azure tools, available tools. So it makes our IT department, DevOps people's life easier rather than handling different tools for the resource management in different environments. Okay, on. So, okay, anyone has a question? Okay, good. Okay, so basically, Azure Arc supported 4 different types of resources to be hosted outside the Azure. The first one is servers. So it can be both physical or virtual machines running Windows or some of the distributions of Linux system, and Kubernetes clusters. So there are again some of the distributions which supported by the Azure, and Azure Data Services and Azure SQL Server. So I'll come to that one by one. First, I'll talk about the Azure Arc enabled servers. So basically, this expands the supports to the server-based resources run outside the Azure. So basically, it supports the physical computers and virtual machine hosted in on-premise data centers and virtual machines even hosted in other cloud providers like AWS or Google. So So with the things I earlier mentioned, so obviously you will be able to see those resources under the Azure resource group in the Azure portal, and you could manage those resources very easily. And moving on, so what happens is, so when you have a server, let's say the resource outside the Azure, you have to onboard that service to the that resource to the Azure. So there's a process for that. So when you onboard it, so we call it it becomes a connected machine. So let's say it's a Azure Arc enabled service. So we call it a connected machine, and then this resource is allocated with unique resource IDs and visibly under the subscription and resource groups. And also you can obviously enforce some policies like role-based access and some policies, not all, to those resources. And some of the features in Azure like tags. So basically they can use tags to do the management easily of the resources. And so when you onboard the service, the server resource to the Azure Arc system, so there will be an agent which installed in the server. So there will be a couple of agents. Actually, there will be one main agent which we call the Azure Connected Machine agent. So that will run and handle all the things in the server which is required by the Azure Arc. And so one of the major responsibility of that agent is to send the heartbeat message. So to identify the connectivity between the Azure Arc and the actual resources. So other than that, say there are some other agents like to send you the logs. So even yes, so the whatever the logs provided by the actual resources can be sent to the Azure environment, and obviously you can see those logs in the under the resource in the Azure portal. And also it supports the Azure monitor capabilities. Yes, as we had a technical tech talk session on Azure monitor and logs, all those things by I think by Sajita, yes. So we to the Azure for the Azure resources, in the same way, we can use the Azure monitor for the resources outside the Azure using this Azure Arc enable server. So this basically comes under the server resources, virtual machines or the physical machines. Okay, yes, those are things which I mentioned, the policies and the monitor and log access, collecting log data. So these are things which I basically explained. Okay, let's move on. So the next one is the Azure Arc enabled data services. So this one is still in preview mode, so they are not still available as a general availability. So, but in preview mode, so you can try these things without any cost because they are still in preview mode. So this supports basically two different data services which are already available inside the Azure. One is SQL managed instance, and the other one is the PostgreSQL hyperscale database as a service. So PostgreSQL hyperscale is a database as a service in the Azure. So it's supposed you to with the Ashwag, it enables your data services to be in any data center other than the Azure, and you can just basically onboard the service by enabling the Azure Arc to that resource. And yes, you can do the other management for all those things using the Azure Arc. Okay, let's moving on to the next one, the SQL Server on Azure Arc enable servers. So this one is also again in the preview mode. So previously we talked about the data services which provide as a service the SQL managed instance, the PostgreSQL hyperscale. So when it comes to the Azure, there's a difference between the SQL managed instance and the actual SQL server. So the SQL managers instance are not 100% capable of what other features available in the SQL server. So because of that, so there are some different solutions like that on Azure. And even now, you can onboard your on-premise SQL services to the Azure using Azure Arc, but still this feature is also in preview mode. And this feature requires a Azure Arc enabled server. So the first one which I explained, so you have to have a physical machine or VM which has the which has enabled the Azure Arc enabled server feature, and on top of that, you can have the SQL server inside that resource, and then you have to register your SQL server instance in the Azure Arc as a SQL server on Azure Arc enabled server instance. So with that, you will get the accessibility to manage and govern the resource, and even get to know about the logs and other informations of the SQL Server instance. So this image kind of gives you an idea what it does. So this is the actual environment, the resource, the server, which SQL instances are in. And there's an agent which I have mentioned. So there are a couple of agents. So one agent is supposed to get the configuration information from the Azure, and one is supposed to send some monitoring events, the logs, like the logs, and even that sentinel analysis information for threat analysis, advanced threat protections. So all these things are supported to be have in the Azure, even though your actual resource is outside the Azure. Okay, so one of the good thing is, so let's say you have Azure Arc enabled server, and somehow it went offline after some time of period, and now you want to access the logs of that resource. Yes, obviously you can't, because the service is now offline. But if you have the Azure Arc enabled servers, obviously the logs are available in the Azure portal under the resource. You will be able to see previous logs, but not the new ones, because the server is on obviously down. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, the fourth category of the resources which supported by the Ashwag, which is this Ashwag enabled Kubernetes. So this is the one which I'm going to talk much, and even my demonstrations are based on the Ashwag enabled Kubernetes. So with the trend of the containerized application in the world, so I think this is the one bit which is mostly suitable for the Azure Arc. So that's purely my opinion. So okay, let's talk about this Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. So as I mentioned, so according to the pattern, yes, so Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes supports you and gives you the platforms to manage your Kubernetes clusters hosted in anywhere. So basically, your Kubernetes cluster can be hosted in on-premise data centers, as I mentioned. So some technical enthusiast people come up with some small clusters with Raspberry Pis and have it on their garage or somewhere in the basically in the house. So those people, you can obviously go to that. And in the industry level, yes, if you have a cluster in, let's say you have a bank, and in every branch you have a separate Kubernetes cluster installed at the on-premise. Yes, so all those scenarios are capable with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. So what I was mentioning, the cluster can be on premises or any other cloud providers like Google and AWS. Azure has tested their solution with AWS and Google cloud providers for the Kubernetes, and even you can have the resource in the Azure itself. So normally Azure Arc enables servers. So when it comes to that, the first type which I mentioned, so that supports only the on-premise and other cloud providers, and the cloud providers basically. So it doesn't support the servers or VMs inside the Azure itself, because there's no need to have them, because all the Azure functionalities are still existing on the those resources. But when it comes to the Kubernetes clusters, so you can end up with having different clusters still in the Azure, but you want to manage those different clusters as a same resource. So as a same resource and with same set of configurations. So in this case, this Azure Arc enable Kubernetes is a great solution. Even the clusters are already resides under the in the Azure.
Tharindu.
Okay. Yes, it's right.
So that last example you mentioned, it's not about that Azure Kubernetes service, right? That example was regarding if we purchase some VMs from Azure and then install Kubernetes agent on those VMs and configure a Kubernetes cluster ourselves, then we can link up that Kubernetes to this Azure Arc, right? Or did you talk about the Kubernetes offered by Azure itself, the Azure
Azure itself. I
AKS?
talk about the first one, the Kubernetes offered by the Azure itself, which is the Azure AKS service.
Okay,
Yes.
right.
And obviously the second approach what you mentioned, yes, that's also possible. Because again, it falls under some kind of on-premise situation.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a demonstration on that, Ravin, so I will explain it on that demonstration process.
Okay.
Okay, so then, okay, so which I was mentioning the all the supported scenarios with the Azure Arc enable Kubernetes. So basically, this lets you control the cluster configuration workloads on in a single source of truth using one single Git repository. So I'll come to that. What's the configurations and if you are familiar with the Kubernetes, yes, obviously you might know what are the configurations available in the Kubernetes. But I think some of not familiar with the Kubernetes. But there's a session scheduled for the Kubernetes by Ravindhu, so that will be done in future sessions. So yes, I'm not going to go deep into the Kubernetes, but yes, obviously, if you have some knowledge, or I will try my best to explain you whatever the things available and I'm going to use. So basically, those configurations for the Kubernetes cluster can be used inside can be rest inside the Git repository, and you can use this. So it's an available feature with the Kubernetes itself also, but with that you are enabled, so you can manage a lot of clusters in a single Azure policy. Okay, so yes, so it supports Azure policy for Kubernetes to enforce runtime policies in your Kubernetes clusters. So, and Azure monitor for containers to consistently monitor all your clusters. So as I mentioned for this Azure Arc enable servers, yes, obviously for the clusters and as other resources, you got to know about the informations, the monitor related information for the of the cluster, and you can see those things in the Azure portal. And the third one, the GitOps based configuration management to deploy application and configuration the cluster. So the GitOps based things I demonstrated. So GitOps is another feature which we can use with Azure, the Kubernetes basically. Okay, so this is a kind of overview. So on the left side, you have all the available Azure resources and the services, and the right side, you have the on-premise or the other cloud Kubernetes clusters. And in the Kubernetes cluster itself, you will end up with having some local tools, native tools, which purely used for the management of the cluster, and even in the actual cluster. So there will be some agents for the Azure, which installed by Azure Arc in order to have the connectivity and use the support of the Azure Arc. Okay, let's move into the demonstration. So first, I'll quickly tell you that Azure Arc currently supports only for the existing clusters. So basically, what that means is so when you want to use Azure Arc enable Kubernetes clusters, you have to have a cluster created and working. But right now, it doesn't have an option to create the cluster itself at the same time. So I'll explain it further. So with the demonstration, okay, let me move into my demonstration. So First, I'll quickly show you my Azure portal. So I don't have any resource group other than this one. This is for the Azure CLI. I will. Okay, so I have already logged into the Azure CLI instance I'm locally using. So, and I'm going to create a resource group quickly. So these things won't take much time using the Azure CLI. So I'm mimicking the behavior. So you can use the same set of tools just to uh, uh, manage the resources in different places. So, okay, so now I have created the resource group and okay, I think yeah, sorry for that. I created the wrong resource group for the, I have created the second resource group. Okay, I'm going to recreate the first one. So if you can see the resource groups names, this one is the Arc local demo. The second demo which I am going to do is the Arc GitOps demo. So the first one I'm going to do is a local cluster which I'm having in my local machine, and I'm going to onboard it to the Azure Azure using Azure Arc enable Kubernetes. Okay, for this one, I need to create a cluster locally. For that one, I'm going to use a tool called Kind. So that's a tool for local Kubernetes cluster management. So you can use that tool to create local clusters, because we don't have a lot of machines. Just a single node of cluster, but you can use these tools. And I know there are some other tools like Minikube and I can't remember. So I know that
When you install Docker also, it also comes with a Kubernetes cluster.
comments class. Okay. So is there a tool to create? Right?
I think when you install Docker on Windows, there's simply a checkbox. When you tick it, it will
Okay.
enable
Okay.
that Kubernetes cluster. Then there's a port number. You can connect to it and create pods.
Ravin, is that Docker Compose?
No. Docker Compose is something that you can use to manage clusters of containers, right? It is sort of technology agnostic. So this is, I think it's for developer use. So when you install Docker Desktop for Windows, that comes with a built-in Kubernetes cluster, like configuration less Kubernetes cluster. So you can simply enable it. But I think Minikube is sort of popular. But if you already use Docker, you don't have to install anything else.
Yeah.
In the Docker settings window, there's a checkbox to enable the Kubernetes cluster.
Okay. Anyway, I have installed the Docker daemon, the Docker desktop because this kind tool is need Docker desktop is needed by the kind. Yes, it's actually can still use that. Okay, so I have created the cluster now. So let me check the cluster. So with the kind get clusters command, yes, there's a cluster called kind. And even if I can use the kubectl command, so kubectl is the command tool for the to get the cluster information, which I just created locally. So it enforces that, yes, master is running. So this is the local host. So this is a local cluster. So, and what I'm going to do is I want to get some information. Basically, I'm going to check available pods in this cluster under the namespace of Ashwag Arc. So why the namespace is, I will tell you. So with the Ashwag onboard, I'm going to use these names. There will be some resources and agents created under this namespace in this cluster. So I want to verify that there are nothing created. There are nothing related to this Azure Arc namespace in the cluster now. So yes, you can see there's nothing in this local cluster.
Tharindu, can you please increase the font? Right. Thanks.
now?
Yeah, much better. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the Azure Arc Kubernetes instance. So if I go to my Azure portal, okay, I previously created the wrong resource group. Okay, this is the local demo resource group. There are no resources available under the resource group. So I'm going to just connect my cluster in the as an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster in the resource group Azure Arc local demo. Okay, so this will take little bit time, like around 3 to 4 minutes. Sometime, basically, I have done several times for my preparation, and I found out that it vary between the 3 and 6 minutes. So because of that, I will keep an eye on this on my other monitor, and I will continue the presentation on this screen. So okay. Okay. Okay, so I already mentioned you that you have to have a cluster in order to onboard the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster service. And when you do the actual connect between, basically when you onboard the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster in your Kubernetes cluster, so there are some things happen inside. So the Azure CLI will use Helm to deploy the agent Helm charts on the cluster. So the Helm is a package manager for the Kubernetes, and so Azure. So in order to do this Azure Arc onboarding of the Azure, Kubernetes clusters to the Azure Arc, you have to have Helm installed in your machine. So it's the package manager for the Kubernetes. So you can use the Chocolatey, the Windows package manager service just to install the Helm. And so the Helm will deploy the agent Helm chart. So the chart is the package. The chart is the meaning. Chart means the packages which are available in the Helm. So I'm not going to do much on those areas, but so we have to have that identified right now. So basically, is CLI will do a deployment of the agents which are used by the Azure Arc in this local cluster. So I can, after that completion happen, I can again run the same command which I previously run the kubectl get pods namespace Azure Arc and check what are the agents that deploy the pods basically and available, and I can check those are actually created. And the thing happens is, so from the cluster, it initiate outbound communication to the Microsoft Container Registry and pull the images required by the Azure Arc agents, and those are deployed under the Azure Arc namespace. Okay, we just got the confirmation that Arc instance is created. Okay, so let me check the execute the kubectl get pods command again in the same cluster. Okay, yes. Previously, you get that there are no resources found in the Azure Arc namespace, but now you can see the pods created in the Azure Arc namespace in my local cluster. So if I quickly go to the my resource group, okay, you can see there's a service called Azure Arc Kubernetes resource. And if I go inside, so you can get an idea. So what's this name and the connectivity status. So now my cluster is actually connected to the Azure, and what's the distribution and the infrastructure and the agent versions and the Kubernetes version. All these informations are available. And as I mentioned previously, you can use the metrics insights. So metrics, so only the available metrics for this time is this total number of CPU cores in the cluster. So it will take some time to load that. So so in my previous demonstration. I have took a screenshot. So we can obviously check this one also. So it looks like this. So my machine basically has a 8 cores, the virtual. And if I expand that chart a little bit, so that will look like this. So that means it does some hard beating with the information, basically time-to-time communication. So that's how you can see the matrix. And not only that, you will be able to see some any insight information. But right now, I think I don't have enabled Azure Monitor.
Tharindu, so does this only show cluster level global information, or can it also display metrics about individual application containers if you have any containers running, like let's say web containers, database containers in the
So I think it will go to the pod level. Yes. So the application level we can do. So I'm not going to deploy any application to the this local cluster, but I'm going to do a deployment to the my next demonstration. Let's see what are the available options that will come under this matrix. Okay. So that's quickly about the local. Okay, so the one thing which I quickly highlight is the connectivity of the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. So basically, the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster doesn't require any inbound communication from Azure to our Kubernetes cluster. It all requires is outbound communication. So you don't need to worry about firewall rules having to restrict the inbound communication. You don't need to open anything. So all the communications are initiated from the cluster itself because the agents are doing that work inside the cluster. So as I mentioned, when the cluster is connected, you can see the connector status and you can see the connecting status when the cluster is still onboarding. And there's another status, offline status, when the cluster is disconnected, fully disconnected. And there's an expired status in the connectivity when that's belong to some other feature. I'll come to that. This under the connectivity modes. So basically, Azure Arc enable Kubernetes supports some connectivity modes. So the fully connected mode, where the Azure Arc and your cluster is having the consistent connectivity. And the semi-connected mode, you don't have a consistent connectivity between the Azure Arc and the your actual Kubernetes cluster. But these things are managed by using MSI certificate, which is valid for 90 days. But according to their documentation, they requires the connectivity at least once every 30 days. And the other drawback is once the expiration of the certificate, you need to delete the entire Ashwag agents and the resources in the Kubernetes cluster and re-onboard it. So basically, the fully connected method works perfectly, but there are some issues with the semi-connected, and even there's a hope for the disconnected mode, but they have asked us to request a feature request if you are truly required this feature. I suppose because of the semi-connected and disconnected mode, so the Azure capabilities like seeing logs and seeing the connectivity status, those are not supported. So because of that, they are not encouraging those modes. The fully connectivity mode is obviously the most usable scenario connectivity mode for the Kubernetes, Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. Yeah. And I'll quickly move into the second demo. I'm going to use a cluster which created in the Azure itself and use GitOps to deploy one application into the cluster. So I'll come to the advantages of that. So I don't know to directly deploy the application to the cluster. I can use the Azure GitOps capabilities to deploy the application to the Kubernetes cluster. So for that time, PowerShell instance, Azure CLI instance. Okay, okay, I have already created the resource group. So this is the resource group. I don't have anything under the resource group, so I'm going to create the cluster itself first. So this is the command to create the cluster. So I'm just creating the AKS resource in this resource group with the name Kate Arc GitOps demo, and under the Arc GitOps demo resource group, Arc GitOps demo resource group. So this will also take some time. So because of that, I'll continue the presentation. So that's how planned. Okay, so I mentioned, so I'm going to demonstrate the Ashwag enabled Kubernetes GitOps. So what's GitOps? So GitOps is a set of practices and practices that provides developers to perform tasks typically basically falls under the DevOps and IT management operations. So the global definition is basically the practices which you used to do with the DevOps and the IT management operations are under the GitOps. So when it comes to the Kubernetes context, yes, GitOps is the practice of declaring desired state of Kubernetes cluster configurations in a Git repository. So using Git repositories, you can configure the you can have your cluster configuration in a single place and use that same configuration on different clusters. Basically, different clusters. So, so when it comes to the cluster configuration, obviously the deployment namespace, services, and even the Helm releases, so all those things can be included. So there's purely belongs to the Kubernetes domain. So I'm not going to do much on that area, but yes, so you can obviously see the namespace, which I previously mentioned. So that's a option available in the Kubernetes to group your application codes, all those things. So it's a subgroups of applications under the Kubernetes cluster. Normally we have YAML files to describe the configurations, basically the resources in the Kubernetes, and we have help charts for deploying applications, so the packages for the applications. Okay, and I think this one, okay. Still my cluster is being created, so okay, it takes a little more time. So in the meantime, I'll continue. So when you onboard GitOps configurations onto the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster, you need to have some other tools in order to work the GitOps. So Flux is a kind of tool which supports that. So it's a popular open source tool for the GitOps in the GitOps space. So this Flux will be deployed in the Kubernetes cluster, and it will take care of the taking the configuration from the Git repository and make the cluster configuration to the desired state available in the configuration. And yes. Yes.
So about this Flux and this entire GitOps thing, is it specific for Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, or like is it a generic technology that you can use with any Kubernetes cluster?
Yes, it's a generic one, Praveen. You don't need to use Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. So
I mean, if we have Azure Arc, does it have a built-in way of integrating with GitHub? So like, do we still have to manually install Flux? And
no, you don't need to manually install the Flux. What you have to do is you have to just create a configuration, the GitHub configuration for that. Yes. And the Arc will Arc agents will install the Flux operations, and then it will manage all the resource deployments in the cluster.
Okay, nice.
Okay, yes, so, okay, the cluster creation is done. Okay, now I have the cluster created. So let me go to the resource group. Okay, so this is the Kubernetes cluster which I just created. I don't have anything. So if I go to the services, so I think there will be some default services. And okay, so when I can verify it, I'm going to connect to the cluster using my CLI. So basically this makes my code cutter provider connect to this particular cluster. Okay, so then I'm going to check the ports available in this cluster under the Azure Arc namespace. Okay, so there's nothing because I haven't still onboard Azure Arc to this cluster. So I'm going to quickly onboard the Azure Arc cluster located in the Azure. Okay, so this is the same thing which I did for the local cluster. So you can see that it says that ensure that you have latest Helm version, that what I mentioned previously, it uses Helm to deploy the agent. Okay, this one also will take a little bit time. So like 3 to 4 minutes, time to time. So then I will continue demonstration presentation. So, okay, so okay, so I was mentioning this configuration flow with the cluster. And so basically with these Flux configurations, so one of the main advantages, so you can configure multi-tenant deployment patterns, multi-tenant application in the same Kubernetes cluster by defining different namespaces for these Flux operators. So that means, so you can have from Flux configurations, let's say you want to have some namespace pods with some different number of replica sets. So like so let's say for one tenant, you need to have 2 replica sets. For one tenant, you need to have 3 replica sets in the same cluster. So basically with this Flux, you will be getting the feature to enable this multi-tenancy by using namespaces and scoping the Flux operations under a namespace. Okay, so I will still my Ashwag onboarding is going on. I will quickly show you the application which I'm going to deploy to the cluster. So this is a sample application in the Arc Hello demo project in the Azure Arc samples, and I have forked it and I have deployed it. So this is a simple Node.js application which when you send a request, it sends you the hello world response. That's the same small application, and it has Dockerized, so it's containerized. So we can use it as a chart package, and so this is where the definition files stays. So under this releases folder. So so it's a Helm releases, so it's kind of, I think it's kind of advanced in the Kubernetes area, because even when I was learning Kubernetes, I didn't go to this Helm releases area until I come to this Azure Arc area. So because the Helm are the package managers for the Kubernetes itself. And yes, so I want to tell you something. Yes, the namespace. So my application is going to be in the namespace Arc test demo. So that's the one you need to remember. Okay, so still the onboarding is going on. So because of that, I will show you how to configure the the GitOps operation, the Flux configurations, basically the configurations to use the Flux in order to have the GitOps with the Azure Arc enable Kubernetes. So when you're using Azure CLI, you can use this command basically to create a configurations. So I have named the configuration name. So this is the GitOps configuration, Azure Arc sample, and the cluster name, which I already created, and the resource group name, operator name instance. So I'm saying the use the Flux operator, and the operator namespace. I'm providing the operator namespace, arcade demo, which is my application namespace also. So all the applications belong to namespace will be managed by this Flux operator, this configuration basically using the Flux agent. And I have scoped it to the namespace. So that's why how it's governed under this namespace. So if I scopes is to the cluster, yes, then obviously it will govern the entire cluster. And the other things are, yes, the Flux operator parameters. Yes, so there are some parameters which we can provide. So here, so this does the trick by connecting to the GitHub. So basically, yes, before that, so you have to provide the GitHub URL. So I have provided my GitHub URL. And this will does the other these parameters includes the path to look at that project. So I mentioned my file is in the under the releases folder. So please look at the path name releases and only using the read only permissions, I think. So and I have informed it to poll it every 3 seconds. So that means if I do any changes, so those will be replicated in the clusters later. So, okay, my Arc enable cluster has been created. Okay, I'm going to double check. Okay, so you can see the instance is created. If I go to the matrix, I can easily take time to update. Yes, because my cluster actually has 3 nodes. The default cluster which I created has 3 nodes with 2 CPUs. So to show you the nodes available in the cluster, 3 nodes available in the cluster. So this equals to actually. And if I go to the services again, you can see now there are some services running under the Azure Arc namespace because now I have onboard this cluster using the Azure Arc, but still I haven't done any configuration deployment to this cluster. But I'm not going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a configuration GitOps configurations in the Azure Arc enable cluster. So for that run, you can go to the Azure Arc enable cluster resource and under the GitOps, you can create the configuration. So let's see. So you can give the name, instance, namespace, operator scopes, whether it's a namespace or the cluster, operator type flag, and the operator parameters, which I mentioned and which I showed you in the source code, not the source code, which I showed you earlier. So I'm going to create it just using the CLI. So you can obviously create it using here also. So this will take a little bit time. So as I mentioned, you have to provide the Git repository. So this supports the private and public Git repositories also. But if private, yes, you have to give some other information. But if it's private, just the URL is enough. So if I refresh, just still creating.
Tharindu, so when you said that multi-tenant with namespaces, is it just creating another configuration pointing to the same repo, or pointing like creating different repos? Like let's say if you want to configure another group of replicas with a different scaling parameters and whatnot, or maybe a different image version or something. So like, is it a different configuration with some overridden parameters, or is it a different repo?
The thing is, Ravi, so it depends on the requirement. So obviously, yes. So let's say I have a replica set configured in my repo as a 1 or 2, and if I change it and I have a different configuration listening to this two configuration listening to the same repo. If I change one, if I change the repo, the value in the repo, so then the both will listen to the same repo. So then both will update. So then you have to have some other way to manage that. So yes, if you think you cannot have the same configurations for the other tenant, the other basically you cannot have same cluster configurations for the other tenant environment. So yes, you have to have, I think you have to have a different repository just for the configuration. So the thing is, all right, so you don't need to have your code and the configuration in the same repository. And I think no, Ravi, no, we can always change the folder path. Sorry, I forgot that. In the parameters, you can change the folder path. Yes, you can have different folder paths with different configuration files.
Then we could have different folders, so like different files or whatever in the same repo as well, right?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, let's see the status. Okay, it's got installed. Okay, so now obviously I forget to execute to just to show. Okay, I'll go to the. I showed it in the cluster, I think, as I can remember. Yes. So there are no other services other than the Kube system default one and the Azure Arc one. I'm going to refresh. And yes, now you can see my application services. So which are under the Arcade demo namespace, and it's available now. And what I was going to do is I'm going to show it to you in the CLI itself before configuring the GitOps, and you will see nothing, no resource available. But then after configuring GitOps, you will see that pods are created under the this Arcade demo namespace. So yes, I didn't do any deployment to the cluster. The Azure Arc enable instance does the deployment. So the benefit is, so let's say you are a company and let's say you are a bank, you have different branches. So you have cluster in each branch. Now you're going to onboard a new branch. So you can just create a cluster in the branch and create and configure it with the Ashwag enable Kubernetes resource and configure the GitOps. Then it will automatically deploy without any issues in a manual deployment according to the configurations which you provided in the configuration file, Kubernetes configuration file. So since I have deployed this application, I'll quickly, it's not copying the command. I quickly view the application. So I'm just forwarding because I don't have any public IP. I tried it once, it cost me a little bit to have a load balancer. Yes, now it's working. So basically under the kubectl environment, I have port forward my service running under the 8080 port, this Arc AS demo service, and you can locally access it. Okay, so that's how you can onboard Ashwag enable Kubernetes cluster and use the power of GitOps to do the deployments. Okay, I will quickly continue the presentation. So I explain this. Yes, so this is the kind of overview which I explained. So you can have two repositories for your containerized applications and the cluster configurations. Then when you configure containerized applications, CI4 can have configured to push whatever the changes to the container registry. And obviously this Git repo, the configuration, cluster configuration Git repo, we have a configuration that Ashwag enable resource. We have configured the configuration for the connectivity between the cluster and this Git repository. The Flux will listen to that and update the whatever the desired state in the cluster. Okay, going on. Yes, so yes, the connection, what I mentioned, this is basically what I mentioned. The connection between the cluster and the Git repository is created as a configuration resource. The configuration resource properties are used to deploy Flux operator on the cluster with the appropriate parameters. Yes, so the parameters which I mentioned, the Git repository and the polling interval. So all the things available basically in this configuration section, and the configuration resource data is stored encrypted at rest in Azure Cosmos DB instance. So they say that the Ashwag, this Git of configurations are stored in the encrypted way in using a Azure Cosmos DB database. So those are not external, those are not visible to us. Those are internal things in the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. Okay, so the main other thing is, so now there are features available on some of the application services available in the Ashwag to onboard with Ashwag, onboard as a Ashwag enable application services by having those applications services on let's say on premises or basically outside the Ashwag. So it supports Azure App Service, Azure Function, Azure Logics, all these things. So let's say if you want to have Azure Functions on your on-premise data center cluster. So what you have to use is you have to use the Azure Functions Docker containers and use the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. So that will do the basic configuration, and you can run the Azure functions as it was on as it is in the Azure. But I think so I didn't went too much into this area. So I think there will be obviously some limitations and some drawbacks because Azure function itself supports the scaling and those cool features. But with the Kubernetes clusters, you would end up with managing it by yourself. Yes, so that's what I need to highlight. So you can now use these services for your on-premise solutions using the Kubernetes clusters. And with the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters, you can leverage some other tools and experience available in the Azure on behalf of the actual application, or not, or rather than the actual application, in addition to the actual application actually. Okay, so that's basically for the presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
I have some questions, but I'll ask them personally because we have run out of time.
Okay.
Hold on, I mean, learned a lot. I mean, it would be good. This bit related to some of the work that I tried to do way back in the past for our projects, but like technology has evolved, so it's really good to know. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, I mean, even I'm a kind of beginner in the Kubernetes environment. I don't have much experience, so I think there will be a session on Kubernetes because I saw that there's a planned session for the tech talk. So yes, so but I wanted to have that covered at least because the VMs and other data services with the Azure Arc, those are not much used in our context. But obviously, the Kubernetes can be a kind of applicable solution. Okay, so then that concludes the presentation. Thank you for listening.